Let's talk about understanding the science of happiness. We have the happiness control panel that you can see in front of you. And we know now that happiness is not just an emotion, it's a crucial component of overall well being. Research in the field of positive psychology has proven that happier individuals are healthier, happier, more successful, and have better relationships, both interpersonally and intrapersonally. They have an increase in self esteem. So, understanding this concept puts you in the driver's seat of your happiness, empowering you to make positive changes in your life. Happiness is no longer elusive. It's something that we can all actively participate in creating, so we can do it as well as our clients or patients. Imagine that you have a happiness control panel already loaded into your brain. And it's not some sci fi gadget, it's right in the prefrontal cortex. When you use any of the buttons on this panel, which you can see in front of you, it releases dopamine and oxytocin. So take a look at this slide with the happiness control panel just for a moment, please. When I wrote my book on Happy is the New Healthy, which was a Wall Street Journal bestseller, I researched it. It took over 14,000 hours and many clients later to collect the data. It took a span of at least 30 years in which I was collecting data slowly to formulate this. And it's also based on solid research in positive psychology. It finds support from works with people like Marty Seligman, Norton, Lubomirsky, Sean Acker, Gilbert, and a host of others. What we're doing in positive psychology is trying to help someone be a better version of themselves. And we don't want anyone settling for mediocrity. We harness someone's strengths instead of pathologizing them. So we've moved from labeling a person to coming up with solutions. How do we resolve the issues? And you know what? It's not complex to help someone become a better version of themselves using the happiness control panel. It takes just 10 minutes a day. And what we're doing in the happiness control panel is strengthening our system and protecting against habituation, which I will talk about in a minute. For instance, random acts of kindness could be volunteering at a local shelter. Engagement could be getting lost in a good book or music. Relationships could be spending quality time with loved ones. Meaning could be pursuing a hobby you're passionate about. And accomplishment could be settling and achieving personal goals. We can significantly improve our well-being by spending just 10 minutes a day picking any of these from the happiness control panel. Huberman found in his research that when we exert energy, effort, it normalizes our dopamine system. So I decided I was going to use exercise as part of my therapeutic arsenal. In came Al, a 55-year-old male who was clinically depressed. He'd seen several psychologists in the past, and I could see that he felt jaded. He sort of questioned whether what I was doing could really make a difference in his life. What was I going to do that other professionals couldn't? So I decided to give Al an experiential tool using my happiness control panel, but not telling him this, okay? Because this was the last-ditch effort. I would never see him again. I wanted him to experience a change, but through experience. So I said to Al, I want you to go for a power walk for 10 minutes or even 5 minutes every day and smile at people. I didn't tell him that the mirror neurons in the brain would trigger other people to smile at him. As we know, when we're dealing with depression, people tend to be very introverted. So I also said to him, don't come back to me unless you've been able to follow through by walking just for 10 minutes every day. I want you to do that. I want you to smile. If you're able to do it every day for one solid week, come back to me. In that way, I was doing two things at the same time. I was giving him an experiential tool. I was also getting rid of some of his negatives, the emotion that he had, if you will, that nothing works. because we were going to give him the dopamine buzz. We were also going to get rid of the introversion, or at least start working at the introversion by just pointing out to him, hey, I can talk to people. And I wanted to elicit compliance on his part. I wanted a therapeutic relationship based on compliance. So if he didn't do this, if he wasn't willing to follow through, that he wasn't going to come back. I wasn't going to see him again. In that way, I was protecting myself as well as him. Okay, so this is a very neat thing to do in the first session. We don't just collect data, but we start working immediately. I think of the end goal and start working towards it. Okay, and that's what the happiness control panel does initially. So we're using it as a tool to elicit compliance, okay, through exercise. Now, social relationships. Social relationships, as we know, are very important. It's lodged into our DNA. We are programmed to connect with other people. So think of COVID-19 and what it did to our clients. They were sequestered in their homes. They were not allowed to talk to other people. And think of what it did to them. It was terrible because all of a sudden they could not connect. I remember Thanksgiving and one of my own clients saying, I'm going to do Thanksgiving in my house, darn it all, but I'm going to put everyone in different rooms in my house and we'll yell at each other across the hallways. So that's how they dealt with social interactions. You know, wasn't it Theresa May, who said in London that she had to just create a ministry of loneliness, because loneliness, as we all know in our field, is it's an epidemic today, especially in the Western world. Not so much when I teach in Asia, because there we have a collective consciousness, don't we? But here in the Western world, individualism reigns supreme, doesn't it? And people don't connect like they used to because the village is gone. We don't have that. We have computers like what I'm talking to you about right now. Everything is automated. So what about this social connection? I can think right now of what it would look like when Waldinger, for instance, the Waldinger did the longest longitudinal study on happiness. As you know, it started with John F. Kennedy way back then. And what he found is the most important variable for happiness is not just our genetic composition, but our ability to connect with others. So isn't that an important thing for us to work with our clients or patients? So I did it with Anna, by the way. Anna was angry when I saw her. This was a recent widow. She was a young widow, and I had treated her daughter years before. And her daughter, Maria, came to me and said, Dr. Neehall, would you do a home visit? Now, I don't usually do home visits, but I said to her, sure, I'll do it, because she was concerned that her mother could be almost suicidal. She had lost her husband suddenly. It was not expected. She had sequestered herself in her house and refused to go out. She was totally caught up with depression. Of course, we know it was a grief response, which manifested itself like depression. She was down. She was really, her emotional regulation was zero. She was emotionally dysregulated. So when I went into the house and I visited with her, I could see that she didn't want to see me. It was pretty obvious. And apart from asking me what I was doing in her house, I noticed that she had several houseplants. So I decided to use an Ericksonian intervention with her. And I said to her, Anna, how would it be for you to find recent widows and take a plant to them? Would you be willing to do that? And she said, of course. That she was willing to do because it was still within her safety zone. She didn't have to go out. She did not have to interact with anyone except to give the plant. Well, you know what happened? She came back to see me in my office a couple of weeks later, and she said to me, you know what? This was useful because I was able to help other people with their problems. And then I reached out to my friends who said to me, they weren't contacting me because after the funeral, they didn't know what to say. Now, look, isn't that true for a lot of our clients? After a divorce, a tragedy, we don't know what to say. So I say in social interactions, love is a verb. Teach people how to love you. Teach them what to do when they feel constricted and don't know. So Anna did that. Her mood was elevated, and then I could work with her. So you see how it is, huh? That the happiness control panel is a nice it's an elegant way, a segue through the back door to get them to do these changes. To get her, for instance, to start real grief work with me, to go into the meaning of grief, what Kessler talks about when he talks about the 6th stage of grief. That's where I was able to take her, but I couldn't take her right away until she had an intervention that worked. Okay, so that's another use of the happiness control panel. Okay, strong social connections are among the most robust predictors of happiness. That's proven by Diener and Seligman in their work in 2002. So this is not just Dr. Joan Neehall saying this. This is found, it's based on solid, clean, evidence-based research. And isn't that what we're looking for? So flow is yet another one of the components on my happiness control panel. You know, flow is an interesting thing because it was Marty. What happens with flow is, if you will, if the task at hand meets your ability and it's sufficiently challenging, you will experience flow. And flow is such an important thing because when you experience flow, either in your professional work or in your personal life, what happens is the ego goes away. You don't think about yourself. Bodily functions are put on hold. You're so absorbed with the task at hand that everything else stops. Csikszentmihalyi, actually, who passed last year, talked about it. He developed the concept of flow. And if we can get our clients or patients to get involved with flow, they experience an elevated mood, reduced anxiety for sure. Okay? Because why? They're focusing on the immediacy of the here and now. So engaging in meaningful activities which align with our values boosts well-being and resilience. Stiger found this in 2009, by the way. And this could be through careers, volunteer work, personal projects. So we're getting our clients to do this right away. When our patients notice their life has more meaning, it makes a difference because it makes everything else better. And there's a nice slide with Csikszentmihalyi, by the way. So we can use the happiness control panel to find something that will help our patients or clients experience this. When we ask our patients to try something in the happiness control panel, we keep things simple. I keep it really simple. Hey, do you want to try that? And when they try it, we ask them to self-evaluate. Self-evaluation, by the way, is a more powerful tool than us letting them know that they're making progress. So we're not going with that top down. We're going with equality. We're both traveling on the same pathway, and you're in the driver's seat, i.e., the client. I really get excited about this, by the way, getting to see how my patients can self-evaluate, because it teaches me a lot about their relationship with themselves, doesn't it? Because polarization is usually there. And part of them is saying, I did a good job. Another part is saying, well, it's not good enough. So this is something else we can deal with. Isn't that exciting? Now, here's the thing. One of the most common questions I hear from patients is, why am I like this? Look, it's a natural question, but it's not always the most productive one, I think. So instead of that, I encourage them to ask, how can I do something to change? This shift in perspective is crucial. We need to move them from being stuck in the analysis of their problems to taking actionable steps towards improvement and teaching them that they're in the driver's seat. They've got their solutions, but they don't know it yet. I love that, by the way, that we're empowering them to say, hey, you can do it. If we don't do that, by the way, we're creating false dependency, and we don't want that. So achieving goals and recognizing accomplishments will boost self-efficacy and life satisfaction. That's not me. That came from Bandura way back in 1977. He was saying that. The control panel that I've developed helps set realistic and achievable goals and celebrates even tiny milestones. That's why I say 10 minutes every day. The control panel helps set realistic and achievable goals. And I'm repeating that because that's important. Because when we see our patients for the first time, they're stuck. They're emotionally dysregulated, and we want to move them from that feeling of being in a cast from their ankle up to their neck into breaking free. So I like using the metaphor, for example, of the pupa and the chrysalis, and we're getting them to break free of that prison through activation of the happiness control panel. And then all of a sudden, they're like a butterfly. The wings might be wet, they might be fragile, but they can move forward on their own, on their own. So they're creating the changes and small successes. So a nice thing for you to ask them to ask themselves is, what went well for me today and why? The why part of it, now there's a why that they can answer, teaches them that they're in charge of their happiness. Now, I think that we can all agree that the most valuable interaction we will ever have with a patient is during the first session. Trauma, as we know, is based on relationships. It always is. So we have to deal with relationships, the ones they have with themselves, with us, and others. And how do we deal with relationships? First of all, we don't need to ask the patient about the trauma they're going through. Just listen. Listen actively to what they say. And in a way in which you can throw back at them, hey, when you said X, could you also be meaning Y? So in that way, as well as using loving attunement or just enjoying silence with them, if that's what they need in the session, we just don't rush in and say, this is what we're going to do, but we just listen. And then throw out some questions, some declarative probes to see, okay, could you also be saying this perhaps? And that happens in the very first session. So you create that alliance right away. And if they don't know where they want to be because they're choked with a feeling of paralysis, could we ask them a magical question? If you woke up tomorrow and had achieved that change that you really, really want, how would you look? What would you be doing differently? Now, I like that because then that tells them what they need to do. And in comes the happiness control panel, which we can slide in as something we want them to do immediately. So we want action immediately. We're not just not going to prescribe. We're not going to just give them empathy, which, by the way, can lead to burnout if we have too much empathy. Compassion won't lead to it, but empathic distress does occur for us. So watch out for that, but that's for a different talk. Let's just get back on track here. So trust is built on the connection we have. When I hear issues, I might ask the why bother question, because they're going to ask it, why bother with you? How are you going to change me? I'm not changing them. I'm saying to them, I can give you hope through possibility, even in the first session. And the hope I can give you is something small, which fits with your personality traits, with your personal circumstances, your lifestyle. You could pick any from the smorgasbord of choices on the happiness control panel, but we zero in on one. The one I really like to get into right away, especially if your patient is depressed, is the exercise bit, in which there's a variety of different things we can do within the confines of exercise. Dasha Kelter talks about awe, going out in nature and touching a tree, being connected. So I like people to tell me, you can go for a walk. You can go for a power walk, if you will, but just for 10 minutes every day. And of course, I like the idea of smiling at others. But it doesn't have to be a walk. It could be Tai Chi. It could be TRX. It could be aquasize. It could be rock climbing. It could be a bike ride. Notice we can go on, can't we, with the cardio bit? And it's not just for them, but for us as well. It really makes a huge, huge difference. So once trust is established, we go in with the happiness control panel, and clients can choose components that fit with their lifestyle, as I was saying, like savoring, which focuses on sensory experiences. The simple act can significantly reduce anxiety and inject hope. And as you know, Viktor Frankl did say, Without hope, there is no meaning, and without meaning, there is no hope. So we're injecting hope in that very first session. Now think for a moment. I'm sure you've asked yourself this question. What's the one thing you know that could make you truly happy? When I ask my clients that, they might think getting a raise, buying a new car, winning the lottery. Whatever the key to the happiness puzzle looks like for you or your patients, chances are everyone is searching for it in all the wrong places. This realization can be enlightening, can't it? Helping us to understand the futility of chasing happiness in external factors or extrinsic variables or motivators as well, right? Since the late 1970s, a growing body of psychological research has investigated how humans adapt to life circumstances. These findings suggest that even if you were to tick off every item on your wish list, it would keep you satisfied for only a short time. The dopamine buzz won't last because as humans, we're wired to want more, aren't we? And that is certainly true for our patients. The unsettling sense of dissatisfaction is such a familiar part of our experience that we've even coined a term for it, the hedonic treadmill. Dan Gilbert developed it, by the way. And prior to Dan Gilbert, Brickman and Campbell developed it in 1978. And the metaphor neatly describes the universal tendency to boomerang back to baseline, the baseline level of happiness, in spite of life's ups and downs. You know that, don't you? The what causes happiness? 50% is due to DNA, 40% is due to our deliberate, intentional behaviors and thoughts. And that's where the happiness control panel comes in. We're giving them 40% chance because only 10% of life events, positive and negative, affect our mood. 40% is due to our deliberate behaviors and intentional thoughts. So I want to go back. So when we experience positive events, such as buying a new home, landing a new job, our happiness will temporarily peak. Life feels great, says Laura Acton, a professor of social psychology at SFU or Simon Fraser University and an associate editor of the World Happiness. So we adapt, don't we? Brain quirk can quickly lead to a familiar cycle of goal setting, money spending, and thinking, I'll be happy when. Haven't you heard your patients saying that? I have. All in pursuit of something that will finally make us happier. Ultimately, it's futile. Even if we found our holy grail of happiness, we will eventually return to baseline. Once again, our happiness suffers. If all of this sounds depressing, the flip side is that the same principle applies to adverse events. When people experience a setback, such as redundancy, layoff, breakup, in most cases, it won't hang over their heads for the rest of their lives. The intense feelings eventually lessen and people recover to their baseline. And they recover much faster than they first thought. I did a little study with university professors, for instance, applying for tenure. And they said to me if they didn't get tenure, it would be the end of the world. They would lose their credibility with their peers, with their students, and on and on. Well, a year later, I interviewed the same professors. Some of them had got tenure, not all of them. The ones who didn't get tenure had returned to their baseline and said, meh, didn't matter. Notice that. Some people argue as well that we have a negativity bias where we hone in on stressful stimuli for safety because if bad things don't capture our attention, it could be the end of us. The famous term, the common term is negative Nellies, and we have them all around us, don't we? Unlike our ancestors, however, most of us don't live in threatening environments where we could be in peril at any moment. But still, these ancestral biases hang over us. don't they? They hang over us and draw our attention to the not so great stuff. So, crucially, everyone's baseline for happiness is different too. Some people are at a 7 on a 10-point scale. It varies depending on where you are, and most of our happiness research solely focuses on the relatively affluent Western populations. Okay, so that's an issue too. So, what determines our baseline score? Research in positive psychology suggests that about 50% of our happiness is determined by genetics, as I was saying. A further 10% could be influenced by life circumstances and external factors such as income, relationship status, and living conditions. So, if a large part of our happiness is due to factors out of our control, does this mean we're powerless to change anything? No. As much as 40% of our happiness levels could be due to each of us and what researchers call our intentional activities. And I want to underscore that word, intentional activities, okay? Because that's what we're looking for. If you want to change your overall happiness levels or your happiness levels of your patients, that's where you need to look. Go to my happiness control panel. Happiness articles offer the same advice. Practice gratitude daily, exercise regularly, and spend time with family and friends. You know, the research shows people on their deathbed, what do they say? They regret not spending time with friends and family, not spending enough time doing the things that were important to themselves. But I want to come back to gratitude, writing, and journaling, and repetitive things or behaviors. The hedonic treadmill will step in, guys, and once again you'll get numbing effects. That's why, for example, making daily notes in a journal of all the things you're grateful for feels good initially, but you'll probably lose interest in it in about a month later when the feeling starts to wane and the hedonic treadmill comes in. So, what do we do in response to the hedonic treadmill and adaptation that I talked about before? Well, I think the happiness control panel offers a unique way to step off this treadmill, providing a sense of liberation as your patients learn to embrace happiness rather than constantly pursue it. The control panel contains the less explored lifestyle choices that can boost baseline happiness levels and keep you happier longer. No daily affirmations are required. No, don't need to write a journal. Not necessary either, because I'm giving you variety within each of those choices. Now, look, the average person will say to get lifelong happiness, they need money. While extra cash in the bank does make us happy, it's balanced with our time, which is the ultimate happiness currency. Have you noticed that we use time in monetary terms, spending time, wasting time, and so on? In fact, research proves that once our basic needs are met, food, clothing, and shelter, as Maslow pointed out years ago, we need just $100,000 to be happy. More than that does not increase our happiness level. Now, look, for people on meager incomes, a significant increase in wealth can translate to higher levels of well being, partly because it affords stability and predictability. But still, once people live comfortably, the data show that more money does not correspond positively with extra happiness. And that was proven in a journal article in Social Psychology, which found that lottery winners or people who suddenly had a paraplegic reverted to their original level or their baseline level of happiness. So we talked about people on their deathbed talking about wanting extra time. How do we do that today? Well, I think one of the ways we can do that is thinking about the trend of just doing your job's contracted requirements, getting your patients to do that, and no more late nights, no more emailing at the weekend, or if you're retired, not taking out burnout inducing responsibilities. Opt for variety instead of becoming an expert, which is what the happiness control panel offers. When you're recycling the same daily movements, whether running around the park or doing a YouTube workout, things get stale. They habituate. Instead, researchers suggest that exercise needs to be varied, as I was saying before, and that's what the happiness control panel offers. So you look at variety within exercise. Routines might not be as beneficial to your happiness as you think. For instance, while adhering to consistency and routines, which is essential with fitness regimes, you can pursue different exercises so that there's space for variability. Under the choice of exercise, you can kickbox one day, rock climb, do Pilates, etc. So we're looking at ways to inoculate our patients against hedonic adaptation while using the happiness control panel. We are less likely to get bored when we have variety and the options presented within each of the components of the happiness control panel, and we can get our patients to nuance them to meet their personality and their life circumstances. For instance, I had a patient who said, okay, one of the things I need to do is to focus on healthy eating. And he also mentioned that his wife had stage 4 cancer. Now, look, based on his circumstances, this was not a good time for him to embark on changing his diet. He probably needed to be comforted with the carbohydrates at that specific point. So again, we can't just generalize and say, okay, let's go on a diet. It's that I'm teaching people how to be flexible. It reminds me of the yoga that I do, and I'm as flexible as rigor mortis. You know what that's like, right? Solid concrete. So I teach them, let's be flexible. Let's not go into rigor mortis. Let's change things within the system and try new things just for the fun of it. It could be embarrassing, but you're trying new things. And that brings me to neuroplasticity, because when we get the organism to try something new, as we know in the research, in neuroplasticity, cells that fire together wire together. And we're doing that right into old age. Now, isn't that exciting that we could use this ability, teach our patients ways to be flexible and ways to get those neurons to wire together? And that's what we're doing, okay? Michael Rooker was the author of, I think, The Fun Habit, and he discussed how pursuing joy and wonder can change your life. He pointed out that the hedonic treadmill lives in the fallacy of the past and the future. But being mindful, which is yet another option on my panel, is a big mitigator of this process, because when we enjoy the moment so much, we don't have time to meditate on what we think we're lacking. Okay? Much research needs to be done in this area, because the research so far shows that fun is something we need in our lives, and we are fun starved. We end up feeling that happiness is somewhere in the distant future and unavailable for us right now. Instead, Rooker in his research suggested we should actively seek out micro joys, new hobbies, new interests that create satisfaction and happiness without the pressure of making serious progress or to achieve this goal. Now, I use this actually with my patients who have rigid perfectionistic traits. And I say to them, get out of your comfort zone. Let's try something new. And I might go into the exercise box with them and say, you want to try out something? How about learning how to play tennis, table tennis, uh, golf? And I throw myself into the mix and say, hey, I tried golf the other day and realized how bad I was at it. And I just took a moment to put that part of my brain to rest, gave myself space to just enjoy the moment. And as I enjoyed the moment, that was all that was important, the process, in other words. So Ehrlich says impact bias is why we think achieving our goals will make us happy for the rest of our lives, because our brains aren't reliable estimations of how happy things will make us. So setting goals is a good thing for our patients to do, but we spiral off track when our overall intentions don't align with our deeply held notions of purpose and meaning. Excuse me. So it's the knowing and then the doing, not the achieving, that really matters. And I want to underscore that. It's the doing, not the achieving, that really matters. And that comes from Christian Ehrlich and his research. So shouldn't we get our patients to use the happiness control panel as a way to just do? The other piece is what I intimated earlier on when I said, check if your goals are intrinsic, that is, they're pursued for inherent needs, your life satisfaction, versus extrinsic or based on external rewards. The intrinsic ones will trump it any day. You don't do things to avoid rejection, negative consequences, but you do things for the intrinsic satisfaction, how it aligns to your value system. So you shift your focus towards the intrinsic. And that will help you chase goals that will remain enjoyable from start to finish. Another thing that we need to do with our patients is to tap into social media. So the most powerful drivers of the hedonic treadmill are our friends, family, and people on our social media feeds, right? It's all down to the social comparison theory, which argues that we determine our social and personal worth based on what we think and how we stack up with others. And that increases depression. It increases anxiety. Why? Because seeing those people flaunting things we don't own on social media can feed our desire to buy and own things that tend not to bring us sustainable happiness. So, as I was mentioning before, people on their deathbeds, what do they wish? They wish they'd spend more time with the people they love. They want to work less. But in spite of that, most of us tend to do the exact opposite, says Christopher Morris. It's challenging to make these choices when our environment doesn't encourage us to prioritize them. Everything around us is distracting, causing us to consume items that give us tiny, microscopic, short lived boosts to our happiness. So the de-influencing trend happens when you use the happiness control panel as well, because we look at social relationships and focus on putting social media to rest and focusing on actively connecting with others. Because, there's something always vying for our attention. I suggest people spend some time in nature, and that helps them build an awareness of what's serving a more profound human need and what has an agenda behind it. We're looking at what's vying for our attention. You can start a book club, as I say, when you start a new hobby, but don't invite your friends. If you're on public transport, start talking to strangers. In fact, studies on bus and train commuters in Chicago and London found that introverts and extroverts benefit from talking to strangers. So while approaching random people on the street might not be your thing, or theirs, by the way, joining a local hobby group can help you tap into the benefits of connecting with new people. Or, as I said, start a new hobby. It could be golf, it could be tennis, whatever. So these are practical steps, aren't they? Practical steps to utilizing the happiness control panel. The client feels accomplished by setting specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals for each component on that happiness control panel or each choice. They get feedback, they adjust accordingly to suit. So what I've talked about so far is what is happiness. I've talked about activating the prefrontal cortex by using the happiness control panel, by people establishing agency because they have something they get to do, because they plan what activity they're going to choose the night before. So when they wake up, they have something they get to do immediately. How often depressive patients say there's nothing to look forward to. But when they have something small and attainable, they get to do it and they do it. And as Philippa Lally points out in her research, it takes 30 days to have a new habit developed. Correct? Now that's give or take. It could be 66 days actually, depending on how difficult the habit is. I'm creating a new habit, a new way of being by getting people to be proactive. So I've talked about that. I've talked about the applications of the happiness control panel, how we establish that therapeutic alliance in the very first session, some of the mitigators against it, such as adaptation, negative focus on the negatives, which was part of our ancestry, and how to circumnavigate against that. It's like swimming with barracuda and not getting bitten, by using the happiness control panel and moving it and being flexible, not as flexible as rigor mortis and my yoga. You start feeling really good, don't you? And that's what we want for our patients. So I invite us all to embrace this model and commit to prioritizing happiness in our lives and work. And that is not being narcissistic, by the way. That's not being selfish, because I'm not talking about rose tinted lenses in which we see happiness at all times. No, in my research, I found that happy people, including myself, and you no doubt, have times when you're down. But the incidents of being down are short lived, because we have tools in our backpack, in our pocket, so we can say, oh, I can do this now, or I can do that. Okay? So I want to close by saying to you that the greatest weapon we have against stress is our ability to choose one habit over another, one behavior over another, by the utilization of the happiness control panel. Thank you. Bye now.